So I wanted to show you the world's simplest carp rig, and it's the way I caught my very first carp 40 years ago. Now back in those days I'd have been using a £4 mainline, seemed quite heavy. This is £8, which to me seems incredibly thin nowadays. That would be the mainline and there'd be no hook link, we'd just go straight through. So take a ledger or a lead, didn't even call them leads, they were just ledgers. I take a bead, and if you go a few times through a bead you can fix it in position just like that, and then the lead stops on the stopper there. So that's the mainline side. This is the hook link side, and for a hook it would be any size 12 normally. This is a size 10, it's the smallest thing I've got, and the only knot I knew was a blood knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. We tie a hook on and we get a couple of grains of maize, a couple of grains of sweetcorn, side hook them like that, and that is all we used to do, and it worked. It worked today. Now the only trouble with this rig is that there wasn't a lot of attraction to it. You had to really know where the carp were and lay a trap in front of his nose, or be incredibly patient, or be very, very lucky. And the next step up from this was to replace the ledger for a swim feeder, and pack a load of corn and some breadcrumbs into a swim feeder, cast that out to a showing fish, and boom, catch carp. It wasn't complicated, it wasn't expensive, no one really showed us how to do it, we just figured it out. You know, we read Angling Times and we just went fishing. Now obviously a little rig like this isn't exactly selective, you know. Yeah, we caught a few tench, roach, rudd, anything with a mouth big enough to suck up 2 grains of corn, it was for us. But it didn't matter, a fish was a fish, a carp was a massive bonus. Nowadays of course we've got lots more options available, but it still doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. So if I was setting up a simple corn rig today, what I'd do, I'd put on some rig tubing to protect the carp's flanks, and I've cut the base of the tubing at 45 degrees there, and we've just got some 0.35 mono for mainline, and we're going to use this for hook link as well. Then what I'd do, I'd take an inline there. This is just a 2.5 ounce distance inline, and it comes with a little tail rubber there. Just pop the insert out, and then we're going to thread the inline lead over the mainline and then onto the tubing, and pop that on there as well. And the reason for the cut is just to make it easier to pop the tubing into the tail rubber there. Then take a regular size 8 swivel. You don't have to use ring swivels or anything like that necessarily, or quick change swivels. We're just going to be tying this hook link on with the same half blood knot, and then we slide the tail rubber onto the swivel, push that fully home, and then the inline lead is just going to sit very neatly over the tail rubber, and we've created a simple running inline ledger rig. So this is how you set up a simple corn rig with rig tubing and a running inline lead, just using your main line for hook link and some side hooked corn. Now you might think, well, you can't catch a big carp like that. Well, I've had anglers at my lake fish like this for roach, be catching roach, and catch a 30-pound carp. So if I wanted to take this to the next stage and incorporate a swim feeder into this rig, so what I do, we need to disassemble this, install the swim feeder, and I'm going to use the tail rubber from the inline lead to act as a buffer bead. Retie the mainline knot, pull the swivel home into the tail rubber. So there we go, that's how to set up a simple swim feeder, running of course, with rig tubing and a couple of grains of side hook corn. Easy, simple and effective. So if you want to make a simple running inline ledger and you don't have something like tail rubber, then yeah, what can you do if you've only got a couple of beads? Well, let's have a look at that. So you could use any beads for this, just 6mm silicone beads, pop those on, and that's going to be the buffer bead. Again, our go-to half blood knot, and depending on how firm your beads are, you might be able to push one of them over the eye of the swivel like that, and I'm using 2 just so that I can sit one like that, one above it like that, and then we slide the rig tubing down. Now you might not be able to get the rig tubing to go into the top bead like that. I can just about do that for neatness, so that's okay, but we've got nothing to hold that rig tubing in place, so that's not ideal. So a little trick to hold the tubing down by the swivel would be to use some dental floss. Any waxed thread would do, because it's the wax that's going to help this to grip. You could use a bit of pole elastic if you've got some of that. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to tie something called a 4-turn water knot. It's also used as a sliding knot for float fishing, for sea fishing, coarse fishing. And I literally whip the floss through the loop and over the main line as well. And that's going to make it grip the mono. Slide it down till it touches the top of the tubing, pull it tight, and that little bit of dental floss is enough to stop the tubing from sliding up during the cast, during the fight, and that will just help protect the carp's flanks. So if you are going to use a little floss trick like this, what you've got to make sure is that the lead can pass safely over it. That's a simple test. It should just fly over like that. If it hangs up at all, then it can be dangerous. So as long as it does that, it's safe. Adding that floss trick to any simple lead system, even if you're using a silicone tail rubber like this, these can get soft and you can lose contact with the rig tubing and the tail rubber. So if your rig tubing is sliding up, then simply add a piece of floss and it will keep the tubing in place and protect the carp's flanks. So there we go. That'll work with any lead as long as you take the insert out. And the reason why I'm using 2 beads is because the knot has a length to it. I can see the top of the knot is about there, and I wouldn't be able to thread the rig tubing into the top hole there of that bead. So by using a second bead, one can fully protect the knot on the top of the swivel, the other can just act as a retainer, a control for the bottom of the rig tubing. And of course we could do exactly the same trick. We could replace that lead with a swim feeder and just sit the swim feeder above those top ball beads there. Right, moving on from side hook corn, I'm going to take some 15-pound mainline, take some rig tubing. This is 0.35 mono, just threading down 0.75 rig tubing, and as long as it's dry and clean, it'll fly down. Right, so once we've got our mainline through the tubing there, we can take our lead, and no matter what lead I'm using, I always take the plastic insert out because this is going to be a running ledger. So the lead goes on next, tubing through, and then with these little Nash inline leads I can use that tail rubber that comes with the lead, and then a size 8 swivel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns with 0.35 works quite well. Thicker the mono, fewer the turns. And that's how I create a very simple running inline ledger. And the rig tubing is there to protect the carp's flanks. It also helps with tangle resistance, because if the hook link does frap around that rig tubing for whatever reason, if the rig tubing is there, then there's far more chance that it's going to fall off that shoulder there. If the rig tubing wasn't there and it's just mono, especially with a little braided rig, then there's a big chance there that that is going to tangle. So to make up a simple hair rig for some sweetcorn, I'm just going to take a size 8 chod twister, little loop in the end there, and it's the size of this knot that can cause problems when using sweetcorn, so it's fine doing this rig with 0.3, 0.35 mono, but the thicker the diameter of the mono, the more that knot is going to damage the sweetcorn when we thread it on. You can decide to make this hair as long as you want, really. So if we're going to put a few grains of corn on there, we want a bit of a gap as well, so about 3 centimetres, and that will be enough for 4 or 5 grains of corn. And we very simply whip round away from the join in the eye down to the point. Now you've got a choice at this point. You can just whip under the hair like that, but it's a little bit fiddly to do. I'm going to exit the shank there, cut the hook length to length, pass from the back to the front, and instead of whipping under the hair, I'm just going to put on a little blowback tube. You can just use a bit of silicone rig tubing, that works great, but that just kicks the hair out really nicely. Nice aggressive angle there, and you don't need anything else. That's a phenomenally effective rig just like that, and quite anti-tangle. Then all we've got to do is tie that to the mainline swivel, and again I'm just going to use a simple blood knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cinch that down nice, then trim that off. We've got mainline for hook link and mainline. We've got a hook, we've got a little blowback tube. I could have used a piece of that rig tube to do that job there. And we've got a lead and we've got a swivel. Simple as that. Minimal component setup for a highly effective trick running rig. Now all we need to do is throw on a few grains of corn and lob it out. You have to be a bit careful when you're choosing your grains. You don't want a damaged grain at all, because it's just going to drop in half. And there we go. Right, that's 5 grains. I'm just going to offer that up to that rig. There we go. I'll probably go 6 actually. And we just thread them from the baiting needle onto the hair. And you just be very careful when it comes to going over the knot there that you don't rip the grains apart. Little bait stop there. And there's no bells and whistles on this rig at all. There's no anti-tangle sleeve there. There's no kicker here. Never use kickers. There's no putty on there. There's no sinker on there. This 0.35 mono is perfectly stiff enough in order to keep it tangle free. At most distances I'd happily cast this at 60-70 yards. Beyond that then it's not going to be stiff enough and you need a more stiff material, and I'd have absolute confidence in catching a fish on it. Caught my first carp on sweetcorn on a swim feeder. You know, I never even heard of PVA back in the 80s, but it worked then and it'll work today. Oh, we're in. Two takes within 20 minutes. Both on 3 grains of corn. Lead setup was very simple, just running inline lead. I could have caught them on boilies, but I just fancied catching them on corn and it still works. Still got sweet corn hanging out of his mouth, look. Go on mate, the game's up. Battered, bruised, completely unusable, but let's try another one and go again. It's only a bit of mono, cheap as chips. If you wanted to use sweet corn with a thick braided hook link like armour link in 25-35 pound, then you can't use something like a hair rig because the knot in the braid is just going to blow apart the delicate little grains of corn. So my solution is to use something called a bait loop rig, and this enables me to make a really thin fine hair. You can use dental floss, you can use fine braid, you could use some hair braid, anything thin really. I've got 6 grains of corn here and I've literally just folded 10 centimetres of bait floss in 2. You want a little straightforward bait stop. I wouldn't use an extender stop or anything like that. And you have to be really delicate. It's very easy to damage sweet corn. It's very convenient to buy it in tins, but you have to respect it. It's a very soft and delicate bait. If you just tie a little overhand knot like that until you approach the first grain, then we take our bait loop rig, pass one of the tag ends through, slide the loop down, and we'll just do another overhand knot. And those 2 overhand knots are going to come together, and in the middle is the little bait loop. It just closes down very neatly like that. Another overhand loop on top as a lock, and another one for luck. And I'm just going to very carefully lob them, just in case that floss slips at all. Perfect little corn rig. Now the bait loop concept isn't limited for use with braid only. It's very easy to create a simple, robust bait loop with thick mono, and I'll show you how to do this. This is brilliant if you wanted to have an anti-tangle rig for casting at range or use in flowing water. And this is just 0.50 mono snag leader I'm using here. Exactly the same principle. Whip round to the point, a couple of turns under to kick the loop out. I'm using a size 6 chod claw here. Nice big eye, very suitable for use with 0.50 mono. I could probably use 0.60 mono for this as well. And you get through to there, and then you can decide how long you want that mono bait loop to be. So if I want a shorter loop, I'm just going to pull that mono through there. It's quite stiff, so I'm just going to use a pair of forceps to do that. Trim that tag in there. No need to blob it, because that's really well secured under there. Now, depending on what sort of mono you use, you might find that those wraps underneath the hair just kind of open out a bit. And if you want to hold them in place tightly, there's loads of different ways of solving this problem. You could use a bit of rig tubing, blowout tube. In this case, I'm just going to grab a little 3mm silicone bead, push that round, and there we go. That's held beautifully in place. Now we're just going to mount a bit of sweet corn on there with some bait floss. I'm cutting off quite a generous amount because I just want it easy to do. If you're too stingy with a bait floss, it's hard to get a result on. Now I'm using sweet corn here. If I really wanted to fish this rig at range, then you want to use maize really. Otherwise the sweet corn's not going to be able to withstand the cast. But as sweet corn is the same size as maize, same principle basically. There we go, nice, simple, robust, long range or flowing water. Perfect for the river if you're piling in a load of sweet corn, load of maize on a river spot. Just fish some grains of maize over the top. It'll work. Using baits like sweet corn is a really simple and effective alternative to boilies. Not very good for night fishing, things like that, but if you're only doing day sessions, then just grab a can of corn. It really is very effective, but you've got to learn to respect it because it is very delicate. Another downside with corn is that you've got to work quickly with it. It will dry out, especially in the sun, especially in hot weather. So you can't mess around. You've got to keep it wet. I know it starts off wet in the can, but it'll quickly dry out. You can't prep your hook baits in advance. You've got to work quickly with it. So it might be cheap, but there's a technique to using it. And the perfect mix to go with this little sweet corn rig. I've got some garlic wheat here that I've cooked up, some nice grains of corn and some hemp. The best way to make sure that your particle mix is always wet is just to keep it topped up with lake water. Just a nice little layer like that. I've been using this same mix for 2-3 days and it's absolutely fine like that. Kept in a nice cool dark bucket. Works great, but you just got to keep it wet. It's very easy to tell if the mix is dried out because when I put it on the spot, any dry grains would literally bob to the top. It's the same with hemp. If hemp dries out, then it will just bob to the surface and be absolutely useless. Now, we're just doing some day fishing here today. If you want to use a little rig like that overnight, then you've got to use something more robust. You've got to use maize. I mostly use boilies, I must admit, but you can get away with just a couple of boilies on there and then a very low cost mix everywhere else. You don't need to use a load of boilie to catch like this. Most of my bites have just come with 2 boilies on the hair, load of mix like this, and pretty much nothing else. Sweet corn as a bait for carp has been around for a very long time and it still has a role today. I mostly use it as loose feed, but there's absolutely no reason why you can't use it as a hook bait. It's not a robust bait. There's lots of downsides with using sweet corn. Everything like sweet corn for a start, but if all you've got is a tin of sweet corn and you want to go carp fishing, then there's no reason why you can't be successful. You still have to do everything else right. You have to have a sharp hook, a well-tied rig, and do all the other things right. You need to get your timing right, your location right, and know how to set a proper trap. You don't have to do a bushwhacker trap like this, you know. You can just make up a simple ledger rig, catapult some loose grains over the top. You can bait a far margin by hand and then cast over to it. There are lots of ways of doing it. With one tin of corn you can do so many things with it. It can be your hook bait, you can make up some salty PVA traps, you can puree it, you can sprinkle it into a mix. There are lots of different ways in order to use sweet corn effectively in your carp fishing. And it remains to this day a highly effective bait. This carp has been in this lake for a very long time and you know, he still loves the corn. Carp didn't stop eating corn just because they didn't fancy it anymore. It's just that pretty much we stopped using sweet corn as a bait to go carp fishing because nowadays there are so many other options. But you can have an awful lot of fun with just a tin of corn. There really are no limits. Just use your imagination, go fishing, catch a chunk. If you want to use sweet corn with PVA, you've got to make it PVA friendly, and the way I do that is we take some corn, and this trick works for any particle. You can buy PVA friendly particles already, of course, but to make them PVA friendly all you need is some salt or some sugar or a mix of both. You can use Himalayan salt. This is just some supermarket salt. We can make it a little bit sweeter as well. Salty, savoury mix, and it's going to make a sweet brine. You want a decent sized mesh for doing this. Mesh comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, but you don't want to use the small stuff, that would be very fiddly. And literally just scoop it in, gently push it through. And if I hadn't have treated this PVA, what I'd have made is hell of a mess. Any particle can be made PVA friendly with salt and sugar. It simply changes the chemistry. So we've had an interesting suggestion from one of you guys that you can use glycerin to make particles PVA friendly. Now this is something that I didn't know, but it makes sense because glycerin is a sweet based viscous liquid. It doesn't really taste of much. I just so happen to have a big pot of glycerin because I used to make my own dips and lugs, because if you mix glycerin 50-50 with some bait flavour, the result is a nice viscous lug. So the first test that I need to make is I'm going to take some PVA tape and I'm going to dip it in glycerin and see if the tape loses its integrity at all. Now, there's no sign of any melting at all. I can wipe the glycerin off. Glycerin is PVA friendly. So there we go. Smash some sweet corn in there like that. Now obviously you don't have to buy big 5 litre kegs like this. You can buy glycerin in fairly small quantities for very little money. There we go, one PVA stick, well it's more of a bomb really, filled with sweet corn, dipped in glycerin, and that's going to be absolutely fine. You can just keep it wet in there. Now the one thing I have noticed is that, yeah, I've got glycerin everywhere, all over my hands. This PVA is quite wet as well with the glycerin. When that dries out, that's going to go a bit sticky and it might go a bit crusty. So yeah, it's a little bit messy this, but it's another option. Well, doesn't it slow the breakdown rate? Well, let's have a look. We're at 20 seconds there. And there you go, completely gone within 30 seconds. Bit of PVA residue, but you're always going to get that anyway. So yeah, does it slow it down? Yeah, a little bit. Does it matter? Not at all. Great. All you got to do now is hook that onto that little rig, cast it out, catch carp. Just nick that onto our little rig there. Just make sure you don't stab a grain of corn in the bag, because then you'll be side hooking and hair rigging. That's not going to work. There we go. A very simple and effective trap that can be cast, catch a carp any time of year. Not going to be able to cast it very far, but it'll do a bite. If you want to make a PVA stick that you can compress make it more dense, get some more weight to it, then just take some breadcrumbs, and these really are homemade breadcrumbs. I begged a bag of bits from the local bakers and just run them through a blender. And you know, as a kid, my ground bait was just breadcrumbs, stale bread. It worked then, it works today. And those crumbs are going to soak up all that flavour, and you just add enough until you get the consistency you want. You don't want big chunks of crust in there like that. So it's just corn, hemp, breadcrumbs, salt and sugar. And that is how you make a very, very simple yet highly effective stick mix. And to make a compressed stick, you put your hand over the end there. So by adding the breadcrumbs, we add density, we add weight. So that's probably about an ounce in my hand there. And that is going to cast better than a very lightweight mix would. And as soon as that gets cast out, the water will get in there, change the chemistry, and those little bags of attraction will melt. Get a load of attraction right over the hook bait, right where you want it. I want to make myself some creamed corn. So to do this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take some regular sweet corn straight from the supermarket. You can use frozen or whatever. Just whack the whole lot in there. I'm going to be using this both in the bushwhacker and in some PVA. So to make it PVA friendly, I need to add some salt and some sugar. So I'm going to put some Himalayan in there, not too much, just to kind of sprinkle. It's probably about a teaspoonful. And then I'm going to get some honey. So this is runny honey. This is the fleur d'oranger, so it's a lovely orange scented honey. And then we're going to give it a blitz. Thick, gloopy. Let's give it a little taste. Wow, fantastic. Super sweet, super salty. So I just need to test this for PVA friendliness. Dab a bit of PVA in there. Then if this melts, it means I need to add more salt or more sugar or both. Just on the edge there. So because that is not quite PVA friendly enough, I'm going to add some more salt crystals. And yet more honey. That's better. That's maintaining its integrity. Just a matter of getting the right balance between the amount of sugar and the salt, depending on how many cans you've done. Use it in a bushwhacker, use it in a bait boat, use it in PVA sticks. So to make a PVA stick, all I'm going to do is take some of the creamed corn. I'm then going to add some of my breadcrumb mix, maybe a bit of boilie, maybe not, just kind of depends what I fancy doing really. And lovely little mix for any time of year. There we go, you can stick that in the fridge for a few days. Stick it in the freezer if you need to keep it for longer. So the reason I want to use honey as opposed to sugar in this situation is for solubility. If I just put some granulated sugar in there, yes, it's going to make it sweet, but it's also going to make it gritty, and the sugar's just not going to dissolve very quickly into the creamed corn and into the water column. Runny honey is already in a solution, so it's going to disperse into the water column much quicker, which is exactly the effect that we want to achieve. One of the great things about pureed sweet corn is it adds a huge cloud effect. It's a really cheap way of creating a cloud effect for your trap if that's what you want to do. Right, we're bang on the money. Here we go. Now, I'm not feeling the lead down at all. I'm just letting it thunk down. I know that that spot is absolutely rock hard. It's tap water clean when I do my test on that. And we've got a nice patch of cloud there in the water. Lovely. Now all they're going to do is row away from the spot, lay the line in the straight line, and I can't do any better than that. Now one thing that is very popular to do, of course, is to fish plastic sweet corn on a bait screw or on the hair. Now yes, I used to use plastic baits in my fishing, but I've stopped using them quite a few years ago. The problem is that if that rig is lost, then the plastic bait is going to stay on that rig and basically make it a live rig forever, really. Obviously the hook's going to rust and stuff, but I had a carp, I caught a carp once, and it was a tethered fish. It was towing a rig, it was towing a lead, and the carp's mouth was really badly damaged. And what did I see attached to that rig? 2 grains of plastic corn. And after seeing that for real, I just decided there and then I am never fishing with plastic baits again. So I don't use plastic baits in their fishing. I think there are better alternatives. If you think you need to use plastic baits because of nuisance species, my go-to solution is just to use rock hard boilies. You can air dry them, you can salt cure them, or my preferred technique is to do a mix of both. The result is a very attractive yet very robust hook bait that's basically impervious to just about anything.